Hey, I'm Sarah Inman, and I'm excited to be here with you and be a part of this conversation and 6 conversations that we're going to be a part of, just listening to people and learning from them. I'm with an organization for Evansville, and really we are just trying to help people not just be in the city of Evansville, but be for Evansville. And one of the ways that we do that is we want to pursue human flourishing, the good of the city through the church. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And one of the ways that we do that is one, listening to stories. We're storytellers. We have a lot of opportunity to listen to people through our own podcast and a lot of other ways that we've been able to tell stories over the years. But also, we know that some of the avenues and pathways that are happening in our city, we want to celebrate and connect more people to those. And one of those is neighborhood revitalization. Austin, what is this Love Your Neighborhood conversation that we're jumping into?
Yes, and my name is Austin Maxheimer, and I am the Neighborhood Revitalization Director for Community One, who we oversee Love Your Neighborhood initiatives and then coach other neighborhood-based organizations in that. And probably the simplest way that we explain that is that we want to our organization wants to help neighbors love neighbors. And we do that through neighborhood revitalization because neighborhoods are just full of neighbors. And so there's some areas in our cities and our communities that have experienced difficulties or barriers to flourishing, as Sarah said. And we believe that those neighborhoods or areas of our town are full of amazing neighbors that can be the change they want to see. And that's the heart of Love Your Neighborhood initiative. But the work itself is not widespread or well done, this idea of assets-based community development. And so we've been practicing it and failing and learning and growing for a few years now in the work. And so we thought it was time to kind of collect up all the practitioners in the ground who have been doing Love Your Neighborhood initiatives and learning from them. So you're going to hear stories, you're going to hear best practices, you're going to hear learnings. But these are people that are in the work, doing it every day in and day out. And we thought we could create a community of learners. And so we're inviting you as potential neighborhood-based organizations that are interested in the Love Your Neighborhood initiative to sit back and learn and grow and contribute your own voice to this. And so that's what these 6 sessions are all about. And we look forward to you guys interacting with us and learning and being co-conspirators in this great idea of creating flourishing neighborhoods. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in and learn from a neighborhood. Welcome to the Love Your Neighborhood podcast, where we're learning from practitioners to help other practitioners begin doing neighborhood work and be sustained in that. So we are joined by 2 of my favorite people. They are working in the Jacobsville neighborhood, and Cobus has the unique distinction of being the youngest and longest tenured neighborhood champion in our region. So We're really excited to learn from him. And also by John, who is kind of the brainchild of the Kid Zone Promising Practices approach here. And he's really worked hard to integrate neighborhood engagement into that philosophy and approach. And so we're just very excited to learn from them. And just personally, Jacobsville was kind of where I began my leadership in neighborhood work. I had participated in a neighborhood initiative in the East End, but started leading as a volunteer community mobilizer in Jacobsville. So we're excited to hear about the amazing work that's going on in Jacobsville. And let's just start there. Tell us about the neighborhood. Tell us about Jacobsville.
Yeah, Cobus, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so Jacobsville is the largest neighborhood in Evansville. We have a little over 6,000 people. We also are we've got several really cool city amenities, like the Deaconess Aquatic Center, like Bossy Field, Garvin Park. There's several really well-known businesses and restaurants like Taroni's or like Gala Cake in our neighborhood. So we're very residential in a lot of areas, but there's also a lot of businesses.
I always want to do the sort of Joshua Memorial Stones and go back to when Hannah Jacobs founded Jacobsville, but I don't think we have the time for that. So in 2023, Jacobsville is a place where you can be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or you can be the youngest neighborhood champion in the Evansville region, or anything kind of in between. It's a really dynamic neighborhood. It actually hosts our 3 largest employers regionally, Centerpoint, Deaconess, and Berry Global, and as well as some other things like Escalade Sports. It's just a really unique and interesting neighborhood. And we really stepped into that work as a organization 25 years ago. Dream Center is celebrating its 25th year this year. And that's 25 years of God's goodness pouring out over kids and families. However, we decided back in 2019, we didn't want to just focus in on the lives of our kids and families. We wanted to start thinking about their environment and specifically their ecosystem. And so we began to explore this idea of replicating the Love Your Neighbor initiative that we were seeing over at Community One and with our friends in TP Park. And we decided, well, it's 2020. It's never been a better year to start a Love Your Neighborhood initiative. We started in January, so we had 3 months of head start in the cold trying to meet people. But now we're in our, I guess this is our 4th year of running that, and because math is weird, and it's so fun to see. We've had over 400 neighbors engaged. We've published a Love Your Neighborhood plan with 15 aspirational goals for our neighborhood. We have a robust cradle to career continuum where kids are walking in a promise for a brighter future based on who they are, not on something we give them, but just pulling out the gold in them. And we have an amazing community of people who are uplifting the common good of our neighborhood. So it's just a really cool time to be in Jacobsville.
Yeah, and you talked about kind of the amenities, and it's in the center of the city of Evansville, and because of that, it's got some interest from people outside the neighborhood for it to be a vibrant place to live, work, and play. But that means that some investment and things come to the neighborhood. And I was hoping that you guys could just talk about the organizational reasons for why you picked up the resident engagement side of things, because there had been like a formal planning for change that had started way back in 2012, and then it kind of went on the shelf. Can you just talk about your motivations as an organization, as a neighborhood-based organization, to pick up the resident side of things?
Yeah. I might just speak quickly at a framing component that I think I'd love to hear you talk more about it, because Cobus is really our guy on the ground meeting those hundreds of neighbors. But when we decided to step into the work, it was clear to us that there was really 2 sides of the coin of neighborhood revitalization. First, it was we have to have some structural changes. The housing's not good enough. Jacobsville actually has the lowest life expectancy of any neighborhood in the 5-county region of Evansville, Indiana, with a variance of like 23 years. We have a board president who likes to mention he'd be dead if he lived in our neighborhood, which is his crass way of saying this is tough. We saw those structural needs, but recognized that if we were to truly seek to step into those areas, to do so without making it about the voice and the power and the assets and the agency of neighbors, we would be committing the act of unjustly working to neighbors and at neighbors rather than with and for and underneath them. And so we didn't want to solve housing. We wanted to inspire neighbors to envision what they wanted for housing and to see where that could go. And so that's really the basis. Do you want to talk about what resident engagement, why it's been so vital?
Yeah. I wasn't around when those decisions were being made at the time, but I think if I was, my mindset would have been, we've met this small population of kids and families, mostly just through our after school work, and we love them deeply. They're amazing. They are the assets in our neighborhood, and the city doesn't see them that way. I would say the wider region probably doesn't see them that way, and a lot of them don't see themselves that way. And so all we wanted to do is lift them up and help them to see their God-given potential, their kids' potential, how the neighborhood can be so much more than a pit stop. And when you move to the east side of Evansville or to the west side of Evansville, just the things that are in Jacobsville that really could help life be exciting and be fun the way that it's supposed to be lived.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned, John, that you're over 400 neighbors. So as of this date in May 2023, we have 4 Love Your Neighborhood initiatives going on, and Jacobsville has the most residents in your engagement database. Yeah, so congratulations. Can you guys just talk about some of the things that you've done to engage and meet neighbors?
Yeah. I personally really enjoy going door-to-door knocking. And so even like probably my first day as neighborhood champion all the way to yesterday, I spent a lot of time door knocking. That's just a different way for us to meet people. We do pop-up events, meet people organically, and just kind of wherever we set up, we're going to meet different people that way. But I enjoy going door to door, meeting people where they're at. I think you learn a lot more about people when they answer the door and invite you to sit on their porch. That's when I have my deepest conversations, probably with new neighbors. Routinely, I will sit on someone's porch that's lived there for 40 years. Wow. They'll tell me their entire life story for an hour and a half, or 2 hours, and it's awesome. It really is. That's where we form, I think, deepest conversations with new neighbors.
What do you say when you knock on the door? I just think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, usually I just introduce myself and say, depends what I'm doing. Normally I'll wear my Dream Center badge, but I'll identify as being with the neighborhood association, and just want to talk about what life is like in Jacobsville, how you ended up here, why you're still here, anything like that. It changes depending on just my first impression of the person. If they come out with a smile, then I'll just talk about, I also really like to bring up something specific, like, what do you think about the aquatic center? Or when's the last time you went to Jacobsville Park? Have you ever been to Jacobsville Park? If there's toys in the front yard, we'll talk about the school. There's just a lot of different ways to interact and kind of start a conversation with people.
Something really practical. We've really built all of our models on door knocking. Actually, we've been doing door knocking aggressively in the neighborhood for 7 years. I estimate that we've knocked on, there's about 1,800 actual doors we could knock on the neighborhood. And we have records of knocking on doors at least 4,000 times. And so we've hit a lot of those doors multiple times, some 1 or 2 times, but we love knocking on doors. And back in 2016, 17, when we first started this, we asked that exact question. Well, what do you say when you do this? And at the time, we were going to get in the mess of it. And so we came up with this little sheet, which was gnomes and homes. And so you would notice if they had gnomes, and you'd notice things about their homes. And that's where you'd start the conversation. And so I'd walk up to the door and I'd say, okay, gnomes and homes. And I'd just be looking around. I'm like, and it was hilarious because people just had gnomes in the neighborhood that I'd noticed, and I'd talk to them about their gnomes. And then I would spend the next 10 minutes trying to justify why I knocked on your door. But that's how you just find really fun ways to engage with people. Cobus is a master at this, and he's a master at it because he's been doing it so well for the last 4 years. But it's whatever kind of creative connection point you can make based off your personality. And I love trinkets and details.
T-shirts.
And I love T-shirts. I love T-shirts. Yeah.
That was really rich, sharing, leading with listening. I think we understand that and we do that, but the idea of being observant while you do that is like next level. When you're going to not just listen to neighbors, but learn in real time from them, not just what they're saying, but how they're building the environment around them. That's really good. As practitioners, I hope you picked up on that. So,
Cobus, I have a question. As you're talking about that, going to doors, well, I guess 2 questions. One, do you have anything with you? Are you taking notes? Or if you guys realize that, don't do that.
It's different every single day.
Okay.
If the point of me being out is purely just to meet new neighbors, what I'll take with me usually is a backpack full of T-shirts, or we've got like Jacobsville stickers, different stuff like that to incentivize people talking to me. Sometimes I don't take anything. Sometimes I just am going to go out and see if I need to take the backpack, and sometimes I do. Occasionally we'll take out and just try to learn from neighbors and take like a survey or something, so I'll have a clipboard, and that's when I'll take notes. But the majority of the time I try to just have a normal conversation and remember what I can and take notes when I get back to the car.
And then my other question, and I think as people are probably jumping into this work, it's really easy to hear someone's story and you empathize with them, or maybe you just want to know more. How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's hard. I think I'm really lucky and blessed at the Dream Center that there's a lot of staff in our office. And so when I go back, when I'm done door knocking, I can really debrief if there's something hard that I've learned, or but we also just have several programs. So the majority of the people that I meet, I can connect them with something. If they have kids, it's obviously very easy to connect them with the Dream Center. But if they're interested in becoming more out in the neighborhood, it's easy for me to call up our neighborhood association president, connect them there. Or if yesterday I met a lady who has cancer who is Catholic, and she was really upset that there's not a Catholic church in our neighborhood anymore. The one that's in our neighborhood closed right before COVID, I believe. And so I know someone that's Catholic, and it's just very easy to connect them and just see where that goes. Each person is different with what the outcome is. For a lot of people, they just want deeper connection. And so I can add them to an email list or to a text list. That way they're becoming more aware. But the majority of the neighbors, the most likely outcome is I will just write down their information and make sure to come back in 2 or 3 weeks, and then make sure to personally invite them to, there's a neighborhood association meeting this Wednesday. We'd love for you to come and connect and meet more neighbors. Or in a couple weeks, we're going to be offering action projects to our neighborhood. You have this big idea, let's get you connected and get you money so that you can be doing what you want in the neighborhood.
So you guys have done such a good job of continuing to meet neighbors, even deep into the initiative, into the 4th year, and that you guys should be commended in that. But the next phase of that, as you talked about, Cobus, is deepening the relationship, is moving them from a met neighbor to an engaged neighbor. And that's the hard work. I just want to say that up front. So no pressure to have the perfect answer. But what are some of the things that you guys have done that you found that have been successful to engage neighbors deeper in the work? And then also, since I meet with you pretty regularly, I know that you guys actually track your investments into those. And so if you could talk kind of about both sides of that, things that have been successful and things that you're tracking as inputs into deepening the relationships.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I really admire Cobus's leadership, and I really admire the wisdom he brings to it. Cobus has been with the organization for 5 years, 5 years, and I think we hired you like a month after you graduated high school.
Yeah.
And he's
Oh, wow.
I think you're completing college right now or something like that. And you carry yourself with so much wisdom. It's just so fun to watch you talk. And so that's why I wasn't inclined to talk first. I want to hear you talk. But what a really important question, because it's great to meet 400 neighbors, but it's not the end point of the journey we want to have with those neighbors. Ultimately, there are around 65 to 100 to about 7,000 neighbors in Jacobsville, and we want to meet as many of them as possible so we have a great representation of the voice and the heart of Jacobsville. But again, that's not the end point. The next point for us is, how do we listen so we understand what the vision for the neighborhood is? And then how do we create alignment behind what we're hearing? And I think that that's kind of the heart behind moving from met to that more engaged neighbor, is that alignment process. Because the problem we've experienced is when we are trying to get them engaged with, say, our thing or our agenda or our idea, that begins to poke a little bit. It's a tension. It's not a right or wrong or black and white. It's more of a tension. If I'm trying to do something, I've got an agenda that I want to push something forward that's beautiful, it's representative of what I've heard from neighbors, but neighbors don't see it as an expression of who they are, their skills, their strengths, their assets, and they're just flow of life. They're just a lot less likely to want to move in that direction and get engaged. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way we all live our lives. I really love the community garden that Redeemer Lutheran hosts on Lincoln. However, I'm not engaged in it, and that's where my family worships. It's in my neighborhood. I'm just not engaged with it, not because I don't believe in it, not because I don't want to see fresh food access come to my neighborhood, because I really do. I'm just not. It's just not in the flow of my life. However, something that's really fun and interesting is right across the street from that community garden, there's a university that just got some funding to push cradle care continuums, which is something I do professionally. And so I'm deeply invested in seeing that idea well up in this neighborhood that I live in. And so it's helping neighbors see alignment within the flow of their life. And so I know that's kind of a hard concept and hard idea, and I'm not sure that there's a quick fix to that, except for what Cobus has done masterfully is spend unstructured relational time with people so we can begin to see opportunities where life can flow together and with one another. Because in a lot of ways, we're asking neighbors, when we say get engaged, to operate in ways that we just don't see in any other neighborhoods, that kind of counteracts the way we act in our day-to-day lives. It's how do we ask neighbors to start thinking about, this is something, this is a side gig you have, or a way you volunteer your time, or the kind of things you do. How do we help you build some relationships and friendships around that? Because that's where you're going to start naturally creating alignment. And so Cobus likes to build relationships with people, not schedule meetings and working times and project times. He wants to build relationships, and from that, those relationships begin to create alignment and deeper engagement with the ideas of our quality of life plan. There's a lot there, but how do you reckon with that?
Each neighbor looks completely different. Like there's one specific neighbor that I'm thinking of who we met this guy one time. He came to a neighborhood association meeting, and then the next time he came, he was coming to everything. Like just immediately knew he wanted to be super engaged. He cared deeply about the image of Jacobsville, and he, in his mind, had a way to fix it. A lot of other neighbors, it takes years of investment, and they're still not at a point where they're leading, or they're just not ready for that yet. And sometimes it's taking people for lunch, which I enjoy, because people, like, we go to Libyan Moms, which if you've never been to Libyan Moms, it's right inside Garvin Park. You have to go to Libyan Moms. It's fantastic. But I've spent a lot of time at Libyan Moms just meeting neighbors, and some of those neighbors haven't been re-engaged, or they've been re-engaged, but they haven't re-engaged since the last time we talked. But some neighbors, this is just a really easy step for them to come to meetings or to engage in something the school's doing. Really, really, re-engagement for us just looks like finding neighbors fit in the neighborhood with something that's already happening.
That's good.
Cobus, maybe you could speak to this. This is just another tension. Whenever folks who are more professional coming to the task of community development, neighborhood revitalization, they think about rallying the troops and collaboration and like collective energy as coming to meetings and coming to open conversations and dialogues. Again, that's because we take for granted that we have this 40-hour work week schedule that we're going to be going in and doing things professionally. We're being paid to be there. And none of that's wrong or bad, but it's just a different frame of reference. Because again, if I want to engage with my neighborhood, I'm not going to do it on my work schedule or my professional schedule. I'm going to have to engage with it differently. And I think, Cobus, one of my favorite things you've done is you've used the assets of our neighborhood to try to create just relational time, because people do spend relational time. They do spend time in a relationship that can lead to some energy and output. Can you talk about like how you utilize Bossy Field in that way?
Yeah. So, like John said, we have neighbors that are professional level people who it's easy for them to connect and have a lunch with me during their workday. But I would say more reflective of our neighborhood, we have single moms who work 2 or 3 jobs who the way that I can connect with them is taking their kids to an Otters game, and then mom just tags along and we get to talk a little bit. Or I know that mom has 2 sons who have a baseball game at 5 and 7 tonight. I can just go sit on the bleachers and connect with mom that way. Again, it really just comes down to individuals and building relationships with individuals and learning what's going to work for them. Because mom who works 2 to 3 jobs, it's obviously not going to make sense that I can connect with her over lunch once a week or anything like that. And a lot of this for me is dying to what I thought relationship building would look like, or what I want it to look like, or the speed that I need things to work to meet my goals. Like, really, it's about individuals and building relationships and being willing to be extremely flexible despite what's comfortable for me.
That's really, really good. So let's bring this even more to life with a story of a neighbor. Our favorite neighbor in Jacobsville, Bernard. So can you guys just talk?
There's some neighbors who would have fought you on that. Bernard said, of course, I'm your favorite.
Yeah. Well, can you guys just share his story or your story together of going from a stranger to a leader in the neighborhood?
I would hate to frame it up that way a little bit.
Okay,
in
sure,
that
please.
He
Yeah.
was leading in the neighborhood long before we ever got there.
Yeah, great.
It was the alignment process that actualized everyone's recognition of his leadership. So I'll start off because I met him before you'd met him. So Bernard is one of those figures in our neighborhood who you know exactly how he feels about what you're part of, the logo on your shirt, the people you are interfacing with.
The shoes you wear.
He loves making fun of my shoes.
Interesting.
Recently, I've started wearing a pair of Nikes that he really likes, but Bernard is Bernard. My favorite thing about Bernard is he is someone who lives his life seeking the freedom of Christ. And he doesn't always frame it that way, but he is such a witness to the liberty we have in Christ in some really beautiful ways. And we need to tell a story about coming back from Boston with Bernard. But when I first met him, it was at a sort of primitive community development event. We hadn't had our resident engagement process built or LYN and all that stuff. We were just meeting with some other organizations that wanted to see housing uplift in Jacobsville. And so we were asking neighbors and organizations to come together, and we were going to do a parcel survey. And I got to meet this guy who had seen it Delaware a few times, and he kept saying, "Yeah, my name's Hot Dad." And I was like, "Who is this guy?" I learned, Hot Dad is Jacoby's dad, and he self-appointed himself as Hot Dad. And so he that's what he wanted to be known as. And we just hit it off. I heard about every single passion he has and every single idea he has. This is someone who habitually buys homes at tax sale and uplifts the neighborhood. He does some really beautiful things. He is constantly seeking to bring life in the neighborhood through food access, all kinds of different stuff. But the number one thing I learned about him, which really blew my mind, is I was just getting to know this person, was every Thursday you could find him listening to some sermon on his phone out loud, walking through the neighborhood with a trash picker and a bucket, picking up trash every Thursday. So that's where I met Bernard, and whenever Cobus came on the scene, I said, you need to meet Bernard. So the real story is between Bernard and Cobus.
Yeah, so the first time I ever met Bernard and his entire family were volunteering at the Dream Center right at the beginning of the pandemic, so probably like April, maybe May of 2020. Dream Center was running a grocery store co-op, and so we were offering food to neighbors and really
2 weeks of groceries during the pandemic.
Yep. And Bernard, I'd never met Bernard. I'd never heard of Bernard. I knew Jacoby from the school, but his entire family was there. Bernard and his wife and their 4 kids, and they were doing all different kinds of things. They were helping out. They were there way before I was there, starting at like 6 a.m. because that's just how he is. I know very few people that love like Bernard does. Everything Bernard does, it's to make life easier for his kids in the future. And one thing he talks about a lot is being the father that he wish he had. And every action that Bernard takes is towards that end. And I really, really admire that about Bernard. He is there. He just does everything. He's the jack of all trades. He'll do whatever we need. If I need somebody to go door knocking with, Bernard will absolutely go with me. He'll tell me which houses not to knock at because they're not going to want to talk to me. I really appreciate Bernard, not only just the way he operates in our neighborhood. Like, he knows everybody. Everybody knows him. One of my favorite stories about Bernard is that he grew up in Miami, and in Miami there are citrus trees everywhere, and you could just pick an orange off whoever's tree it was because you have a tree in your yard and they can pick whatever they want. And for a lot of people, in Bernard's story, a lot of people, that was the food they got.
Oh,
and
wow.
so when Bernard, he bought a property a couple years ago, and one of the first things he did was plant trees in the sidewalk so that there are fruit-bearing trees now that they don't pick off of, but he lets his neighbors pick off of because for them that may be the only food they get in the day. And he makes that very known.
Yeah.
And everything that he's doing is for someone else.
I've not met anyone with the sort of intensity and selflessness that Bernard has.
But let's let's back up because these guys don't know Bernard. And so
there's so many details. It is hard to describe.
I know, but the things that I really want to draw out for our listeners is he was very cynical and skeptical of Dream Center as a neighborhood-based organization when he first met you guys, right? And he doesn't like existing systems in any shape, form, or fashion. So what are the investments that you guys made, intentional investments that you made to go on that journey to build trust and relationship?
So I'm going to just speak candidly on a couple of things.
Please, that's why we're here.
I think Bernard's concerns are maybe representative of concerns I've seen across our neighborhood, which is leaders who come into neighborhoods or exist and operate in neighborhoods are seen as professionals who are maybe in it for the wrong reasons, or there's some real cynical things. Bernard's not the only one I've ever heard this idea from. Their neighbors feel uncomfortable when you come in wearing a suit, or you're in some sort of vehicle that they couldn't get for themselves. These are really hard, weird aspects of working across socioeconomic lines, right? And for us with Bernard, I think the first thing is our executive director at Dream Center wears the same dad shoes that he got from, we never know where Jeremy gets his shoes. There's nothing to your shoes. It may sound like it's really important, but I think being ourselves every single day and having that consistency and integrity really meant a lot to Bernard. What he saw was what he got, and it was the same thing every day. And so we tried to bring him in to the highest levels of leadership, interact with decision makers and key people to say, hey, look, we just want to love this neighborhood we've been in for 25 years. How can we help you feel safe? That's really our motivation here. And how can we prove to you that we are who we say we are? And it looked like just being around each other all day long. And again, it goes to that alignment. He trusts our executive director, and I think he trusts me. He and I have a great relationship. And I think we should disclose, he joined our staff despite not really liking the nonprofit sector. And he is this amazing team member on our team now who we just adore having him around because he's a vital voice. But I think it really just was that alignment through him seeing our integrity and having that authenticity and that back and forth. And it really looked like investing the time to be authentic and true to him. And so we didn't put on a facade like we were better or worse than we were. We just tried to be ourselves with him.
Yeah, and something to just highlight, you said you continued to invite him in even after he had voiced maybe not the most favorable initial opinion.
He does not like nonprofit executive leaders.
And so the continued invitation is also important, right? Like drawing near to him, but then continuing to invite, even if that initial relationship is a hard one.
That's right.
We want to keep building on it. So I want to talk about sustaining a relationship now. So Bernard was the example of a neighbor that kind of you met and then moved into leadership or aligned his leadership with the neighborhoods. Let's talk about Melissa real quick, because we can't talk about the Jacobsville neighborhood without talking about Melissa.
We have hundreds of favorite neighbors, by the way.
Yeah, right. But we only have time for a couple. And so Melissa, I met her door knocking in 2012 in Jacobsville, and she was a person of peace, just like Bernard, who immediately got the vision for change and rooted in residents, and she was excited and activated by that. And she opened so many doors for me relationally in the neighborhood, and she's been leading ever since. And so what kind of things have you guys done as you kind of took on the mantle of lead agency in the neighborhood, have you done to kind of pour into Melissa and sustain her engagement and leadership?
For me, the way I feel like I biggest support Melissa is just doing whatever she's doing, because there are so many times where we have a neighborhood association meeting and there's 4 people and it's Melissa, 2 of her kids, and me. And
yeah,
like, that's okay, because Melissa knows we're connecting with people in other ways. She knows the importance of just being consistent and being in the neighborhood, being visible. We participate in Delaware's PTA. We participate just in places where Melissa and her team, she calls them, are leading. One of the biggest ways I think we can connect, besides bringing other neighbors into that space, is just being there and doing whatever we can to help them win in the moment.
Yeah. One thing that's really important with Melissa as a story is, and it just goes back to the basic idea of assets-based community development.
Yeah.
We habitually overcomplicate this.
We all do.
Yeah, it's seeing, and you said it from the very beginning, our kids, our families, our neighbors, they're assets. And it's going to them and not expecting them to solve housing for their neighborhood. It's not going to them and expecting them to solve hunger in their neighborhood. It's going to them and saying, the image of God is in you, and you're already doing something that expresses that image. How can we just hear it, and how can we create alignment to it relationally? So Bernard and Melissa have grown really deeply. I don't know how much of that is our influence and how much of that is just them being who they are, but I do know that we've made connections that wouldn't have happened if we weren't there. But just bringing alignment so that this beautiful thing that Bernard or Melissa wants to do, we just resource it with relationships and money, actual money. If you think that money doesn't solve problems, then you don't need it. Just give it to us. Money, resources, access to voice and capital, and just getting underneath and serving what they're doing on a regular basis. So it's not saying to Melissa, who's super passionate about 100 amazing causes, but she applies her time and energy to the PTA and the neighborhood association. So we show up to those things, we hear what they want, and we say, how can we serve that, and how can we get underneath that? Mm-hmm. And doing that over and over again is what I think has helped her feel a little bit more sustainable through the journey. She's had it rough past few years, and we don't mean to tell other people's stories, except to say, on paper, a lot of the things that we've seen successes and wins in, I don't think would have happened naturally if it wasn't for the healing power of relationships.
Yeah. So speaking about just continuing in the work and continuing to make these investments, you guys are in year 4. So you're the second longest Love Your Neighborhood initiative underway in our region. If you could, just what things are you learning at this juncture? What tensions, what barriers, what wins? Yeah, like where's momentum in life? Because, we talk about Love Your Neighborhood as a 10-year commitment to neighborhood, minimum, just so that we're serious about the commitment, because neighbors deserve that sort of deep committed relationship. But it's hard and it's a grind. And so, if you guys just talk about your point in time, which is unique to some of the other neighborhoods and certainly ones that are getting underway, or potentially getting underway. Yeah, what are you learning? What barriers, what tensions?
Yeah, I think one thing probably since the beginning of 2023 that I've learned the most is just the importance of different communication methods and touch points for neighbors. I personally really enjoy just being face-to-face with people. And for me, that's what it'll always come back to. That is the most effective way thus far. However, there are over 6,000 people in our neighborhood. We've only engaged 450 of them. And so I'm not going to be able to meet everybody by door knocking. I'm not going to be able to meet everybody by neighborhood association meetings. We're going to have to learn different ways and try and fail at different ways of communicating with people. And so this year so far, that's been really utilizing our text service more effectively, I think. Also, we've started a Facebook page. We've started connecting with people on there. We also have a website for the LYN movement in Jacobsville. And we've seen quite a few.
You guys do mailers?
We do. That's the most effective and also the most expensive. So we just haven't utilized that. One thing we did this year, Melissa started. I couldn't tell you how long ago. an event called Flower Power, where really she just brings people together, plants flowers. Her favorite part of the event before meeting people is putting little stickers or keychains or something inside that just talks about how much the neighborhood loves you and your neighbor loves you. And so we did one a few months ago, or maybe a month ago or so, and we brought together volunteers from all throughout the city to distribute flowers to 12 blocks of Jacobsville. And what we did was Melissa made little cards that she put inside that just said, you are loved, and then put hashtag for Jacobsville, which is the website and the social media for the Hawaiian movement in Jacobsville. And we had like 5 times as many hits on that one Saturday that we've ever had on the website. And so that was just a new way for us to not only meet people face to face, but also for them to connect to material we have online or different ways to connect virtually.
Yeah,
it's really good. There's so much I want to say here. And so I'm going to try to condense it down into 3 main bullet points. So I'm going to say, again, we've recognized the need for sort of 2 sister approaches: engaging with residents to empower their voice, to create alignment, and then let that sustain action that actually changes our environment. But additionally, environmental changes, that structural changes to our neighborhood. And it is fair to say, I think at this point, that we've learned that to expect our neighborhood to take on the mantle of actualizing some of their dreams and visions from a implementation and action standpoint, I don't know that that's something that we would want to say, no, you couldn't do that, because in no way, shape, or form is that our attitude. But it is also fair to say it's okay for us to recognize that neighbors can voice a want and a dream for their neighborhood without having the sense that they're the ones who want to execute on it, right? I would really like to see Trader Joe's come to Evansville, and so I'm going to keep saying that, but I'm not sure that I'm the guy who can make that happen. But I'm going to let people know. And that's actually kind of just like a basis of democracy and being in a community. It's okay to voice things and trust and hope that my neighbors who have sort of the bandwidth, maybe not capacity or agency, but bandwidth or know-how to make that happen. And so we're realizing that it's okay to see that voicing something doesn't mean that they're going to be the ones who want to do it. And so in that, we had a lot of hesitancy to do development ourselves at the very outset, and I think it's been a healthy thing, because we didn't want to do things for the neighbors. We wanted them to do it for themselves, except sometimes neighbors just voice something they want, and it's like me saying I want a Trader Joe's. I'm not going to go open a Trader Joe's. I really like what I do. I would just like to shop at one. And so that's a tension again, right? There's just a lot of tensions here. And one that kind of earmarks this for me is, we've never really talked about this, but and you said mailers and made me think of it. If you send a mailer in Jacobsville, it's like sending a mailer to Mount Vernon, Indiana, because it's about proximate population sizes. So it's just a lot. However, that's not to say that they're not worth investing in. On the day we rolled out our Love Your Neighborhood initiative, a guy was at our rollout event. His name was Charlie, we'll call him. Charlie had recently entered into a recovery process and was going through the 12 steps, and he shared with me he was walking that morning and praying and asking God, what do I do to love my neighbor, was literally the question he was asking. And then he gets home, and in his mailbox is a flyer that says Love Your Neighborhood Initiative Rollout. And he showed up, and he has tears in his eyes just talking to me like, wow, God answered my prayer in like a minute. I'm like, that's a really cool story. And Charlie lives on the south side of our neighborhood, and I saw him actually at our most recent Love Your Neighbor Day. He was working in the park doing some cleanup. But he's not really showing up to a lot because he is working third shift, and he's just a busy guy. But I've noticed that his house is so much prettier than all the other houses, and that's something that's different than used to be. He just takes care of his and I've engaged with him 1 or 2 times just casually, and he has caught the vision. Even if it's just impacted him personally in his bandwidth, but he's caught the vision. And he's hoping that someone's going to take everyone's vision and move it forward, to which I'd say that final point there is, we're trying to take on the risk of saying we don't want to do anything for people, but we've heard neighbors say this, and we kind of hear some of it as John's Trader Joe's thing. You want to see this, but you don't want to be the one who makes it happen, and that's okay. And so we're beginning to ask questions like, how do we maybe step into some of those spaces that we don't see anyone else stepping into? And so that's where we're at in year 4, is asking, how do we step into that sort of new curve of learning?
Yeah. Well, let's keep on that track, and let's talk about stakeholder engagement. So, we're talking to practitioners of neighborhood-based organizations leading a Love Your Neighborhood initiative, and Jacobsville has every neighborhood is unique, and every agency is going to be unique, but Jacobsville's story is that there's a lot of people that want to do change to the neighborhood out of a good, sincere heart of wanting to see positive change and development come, right? However, sometimes that's in direct tension with the residents' feeling of agency, as you talked about. So what would you just share with these other practitioners about how to engage stakeholders, what you're learning about having conversations with them, successes, failures in that arena?
Oh, golly.
And I'm going to share this with City Council, DMD, and the Mayor's office as soon as... No, I'm just kidding.
I'm going to go out on a limb to try to be the umbrella on a hard statement. One of the key tenets of assets-based community development, anyone who's listening to this has probably heard this idea at this point. If not, this is sort of your welcome into this theory, which is change that happens to neighbors is often felt as injustice, and change that happens through neighbors is often felt as justice. So I've always perceived justice as sort of the structural recognition of someone's dignity. I recognize that when injustice happens, I have sought to diminish or harm someone's dignity. And so it's really important that the whole research field has said when you do things to neighbors and to neighborhoods, it feels like, I'm going to just use the definition here, it feels like you are trying to diminish or quelch or constrain someone's dignity. I don't want to be in the position where my actions are making someone feel that way. And I can tell you right now, that is exactly how neighbors feel when it comes to development coming from the outside, happening to them. I'm hoping to be as balanced on that as possible. And I'll be very direct. There's a lot of frustration that we absorb and understand and perceive, because when you feel like you're being acted against unjustly, it really makes you mad. It really hurts. And historically, that it wasn't always what you just said. I do believe, for the most part, most development that's trying to come into the neighborhood has benign, at least benign and or benevolent motivations. 50 years ago, change that was happening in the neighborhood was called redlining, and it meant to do harm. It was segregated schools. It was segregated housing. We have neighbors in our neighborhood today who went to segregated schools in Evansville. And those were policies and structures that happened to them. And we're still trying to help them heal from the idea that someone would come in and have positive intent. Yeah. And we're also trying to help our stakeholders recognize that, look, I know it wasn't you who did that, but you do represent a whole stream of decades of malpractice investment into these neighborhoods, and so we're going to have to find a different way. Your turn.
Yeah,
what
Cobus,
do you think?
Just very practically, as neighborhood champion in your workflow, how do you connect and educate and inform and encourage stakeholders?
Yeah, I probably don't have a lot of the same experiences that John does. Most of my experiences are fantastic, and people that
That's good.
care deeply about the people in Jacobsville. I really enjoy working with the churches that are interested in participating in LYN. And so there are 14 churches in Jacobsville. We also have several partners from outside the neighborhood who want to come in. There's a lot for us of being able to kind of reframe what serving Jacobsville looks like. I enjoy that. I enjoy knowing that my experience, the people that we're working with coming in from outside the neighborhood have good intentions and want to just care for people of Jacobsville. And so we get to kind of grow and go through that together. Some ways that turns out is that we're cleaning a public space that neighbors identify as not being cleaned properly or not being taken care of properly. Jacobsville Park is a pocket park in our neighborhood that just is not taken care of. And we routinely have community stakeholders from outside of our neighborhood that come in and they want to connect. And this is one easy way for us to connect that is impacting moms who want to take their kids somewhere to play, but aren't going to take their kids there because there's hypodermic needles everywhere, or there's a slide in our neighborhood at this park that is called the poop slide because for an entire summer, every Friday, somebody would poop down the slide. And
not a kid.
Not funny, but
not funny.
But that's Evansville. That was happening in our city.
Yeah. And it was only cleaned because neighbors would go and see how awful this is. And this is a place where really one of two places in our neighborhood kids can go. And it's awful. It's disgusting. And it was only cleaned because neighbors would step up and clean it.
Wow.
I want to speak to a structural thing, not to diminish that very strange and hard to grapple with story. We work really hard to create safety, psychological safety for all involved. We're trying to create a movement in Jacobsville. And so movements don't go very far if people don't feel safe, right?
Sure.
And so we're not in any way, shape, or form gatekeepers to the neighborhood, as much as we may think we should be or want to be. But we do work really hard to be verbose and robust voices in the room when someone's talking about our neighborhood at a larger level. And we do kind of advocate as if injustice could happen. And so we're not always super nice and we're not always super slow to give feedback because we know what's at stake.
Yeah.
And so at that level, and any of your listeners, I would deeply encourage taking a long, hard look at who are the people who are going to really advocate for the safety of your movement at a upper level, so that those who are working with neighbors and those who are working to make the neighborhood more beautiful and create development in it can operate with a little bit more freedom and comfortability and clarity without having to be as nervous about making those missteps. Because if I'm constantly nervous I'm going to make a mistake or falter, I might be afraid to do fun, innovative, and visionary things inside a movement. Movements thrive on freedom and fun. And so have some hard conversations about how do we allow an umbrella to happen so people can have innovative fun on the ground and do some great things and cause some good trouble, and to make sure that development's happening at a larger level has advocacy that's a little bit more like, hey, you're not going to just happen to this neighborhood. Yeah. Again, these are really hard conversations that we're by no means experts, but we're recognizing, yep, we chose to do this, so we have to have the muscle built in our organization to advocate for what Jacobsville needs from an offense and defensive perspective.
Yeah. Well, I didn't expect anything less, but this has been very rich. However, we are winding down on time. I'd like to close with this way here and one more time from each of you. If you could go back and talk to John Benton, 2018, who's getting ready to go on his first door knocking in the 4 blocks, what would you say to him? And conversely, if you were going to go back and talk to Cobus of 2020, who's getting ready to step into his first day of the neighborhood champion role, what would you guys coach and share with yourselves?
First things first, enjoy it more. I was so on task in those relationships, and I wish I would have just slowed down to enjoy it more. There's a guy named Juan who I get to see every once in a while, but I I really look back fondly on just sitting on Juan's stoop and talking to him. I enjoyed it at the time, but I wish I would have enjoyed it more. And fail forward a little bit more, takes more leaps and risks. I was so afraid that if I went and did this thing, maybe neighbors would be upset with it, when I realized it's exactly what they wanted me to do. And so don't be afraid to act like, now that you've got relationships, that you're kind of a neighbor too. And it's okay for you to act like a neighbor. And so take ownership of your neighborhood earlier as you're gaining those relationships. Don't wait for permission to take ownership. Neighbors want that from you.
Kobayashi.
Yeah, he has a good answer. I would agree. I would say enjoying things more, just kind of realizing in the moment, like, this is fun. I really enjoy this. And it's easy for me to look back, but I just wish I'd slowed down a little bit. But my answer would be like documenting things better. I wish I'd taken a lot more pictures. I wish I had, after like sitting on someone's porch for an hour and a half, put in a journal exactly what we'd talked about, so that I'd been able to go back later. And I have a fairly good memory that helps me a lot with what I do. But I just, with certain key people that I remember talking to, I wish I could remember exactly what we talked about. I wish if I could go back, I would document things better. I'd take more pictures, but ultimately I think I'd just be more still in the moment and just really enjoying getting to talk to the people that I got to talk to.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. So thank you guys again. And John actually offered to send us off with a benediction. So we have a special close with this.
I am the master of being a little bit facetious, but I am really, I tend to be very sober-minded and never do anything silly. But yeah, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may his face shine upon you. And all that you're doing, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And thank you so much for stepping into the role of loving your neighborhood in the way Jesus loves your neighborhood.
Amen.